This is Nicole Sauce from the Holler Homestead giving you a woman's take on the walk towards independence, because we're living free in Tennessee.
Hello, my friends. Today is Monday, April 10th, 2017, and this is episode 31 of Living Free in Tennessee. And the 8-week time pressure episode has arrived. That's right. Center Hill Sun goes to press this week. And though there is still time to place an ad if you want to reach 20,000 people who love the outdoors, rural living, and country fun, we are very focused on layout and making sure the editing is good. You know, our goal is typo free, and that takes some time. So in the past, episodes on this particular Monday have been a little lackluster sometimes because I've been feeling a huge pressure to jump back on the computer and continue laying out ads for people. And so this time I took an opportunity that presented itself last week to pre-record a wonderful chat with Dori Mulder. Do you remember who Dori Mulder is? You know who she is. She's the person who was getting ready to buy a piece of land. I think she first started writing to us back in late December, maybe early January. And the piece of property she's been looking at sounds really cool. It's 40 acres. It's got a cave with a house built onto it, and it's right on a river. It sounds fabulous. And I took the opportunity when she mentioned that she had closed on the property to talk with her after she spent her first 5 days there on her first purchase of a large piece of land. So today's episode will mostly be centered around that interview. But first, before we dive into that, I wanted to talk to those of you in Middle Tennessee who like to learn. There is an event over on the Homesteaders of Middle Tennessee group on Facebook. On April 22nd, they're doing a beginner mushroom workshop. It looks like it's over at Fablehaven Pharmacy in Lyles, Tennessee. And it's an introductory class to outdoor cultivation. It'll cover the basics of mushroom growing, how to set up a strophe hair and rugoso and annulated bed, whatever that is. I should probably go to this in your garden, and then also how to harvest them. You'll leave having the basics of what you need to do to set up your own patch and have different varieties of mushrooms in your life as you move forward. I believe the event is free of charge, but they're going to have a tip jar out. And guys, do bring some money for a tip, because people who put together courses like this really could use the support. And I believe they're also going to have some grow kits available for sale there if you want to get started. By the way, there's a guy his name is Trad Cotter, I think. He wrote a really great book about mushroom cultivation, and I will put a link to that in the show notes. He also provides spores. So maybe if you're in Tennessee, been thinking about getting into mushroom growing, consider heading over to the Homesteader of Middle Tennessee group and RSVPing for that event. I have put a link directly to the event in the show notes, but I don't believe you can RSVP unless you are a member of that group. So you may have to, add the group and wait for yourself to be approved. It usually doesn't take very long for that to happen. Also, if you want to drop me a note, question, or comment, you can email it to me at NicoleSauce@gmail.com or leave me a comment over at livingfreeintennessee.com. So far, we haven't gotten a lot of comments on the site. I do have it still locked down. We'll be deploying the AsciiMet spam filter to make it easier to comment without me getting a whole bunch of spam, and it'll be a little more open in about a week. Wanted to get the paper out before I dive into a bunch of web development. Okay, now let's go into our regular segments, Eating Seasonally and Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we share what we're eating each week as it comes to us, and we talk about ways that we're using what we store. Because I think one of the challenges can be, as you're growing your own food and storing stuff, like how to make it interesting when you have a lot of something. So this segment's a little light this week because I frankly didn't eat very much this week, so not much had to be prepared. I ended up getting a wonderful case of what I thought was food poisoning, but probably was really the stomach flu about 2 hours after recording the episode last week. So I didn't eat anything. That was a really made for low progress in the Prepper Pantry. But what we do have coming on, we still have wild mustard, although it's starting to wane. I've noticed that the yellow flowers are starting to fall off. Pretty soon those seed pods will be available to harvest, and you can actually make mustard from the seeds of the wild mustard plant, by the way. So we're keeping our eye on a couple of patches to see if we want to collect seeds, and I also want to spread more of it around the holler. This is how we get the quote-unquote wild plants that aren't really wild going all over the place so that we have more abundance for everyone. Hairy vetch is coming up, and pokeweed. I've seen my first pokeweed coming up out of the ground. So pokeweed is something that you're not supposed to eat it without having boiled it in salt water twice. So you take the greens, you bring the salt water to a boil, pour it off, put them back in the water, bring the salt water to a boil, pull it off, and then it's supposed to be ready to eat. And that's because pokeweed can cause some diarrhea for some people if you don't do that. Now, from everything I've heard locally, a lot of people will eat the baby shoots without doing that. However, I've never tried that, and pretty much every recipe I see for pokeweed calls for you get a bunch of the greens, you boil them, rinse, and then serve them as sort of almost like, southern mustard greens, which are really well cooked with onions and bacon and stuff. You serve them that way. You can also fry them up in your eggs in the morning. That's the way that my neighbor grew up eating pokeweed. But it's a pretty tasty green once you get it to that point. For those of you who are a little icky about eating wild plants, this is probably not the one for you to start with. Anyway, from the pantry, I finally tried that sweet potato chili with wild garlic in it. It's really good. I just took a bunch of sweet potatoes. I took a package of venison. I sauteed up some of the wild garlic and threw in a jar of tomato sauce from the pantry and some cumin and I have some dried hot peppers that I threw in there, salt, pepper. Threw it in my instant, I have not an instant pot, but I have an instant pot style pressure cooker that's also a pressure canner. Threw it in there because I was way behind schedule yesterday and it was 6 o'clock and I hadn't started making the chili, which is supposed to cook for 4 hours. So instead I just threw it all in there, pressure cooked it for 20 minutes, and we had a fantastic meal. Also, in the garden, baby lettuce is finally here. So now, instead of just wild greens, we're starting to get baby lettuces, and the asparagus lived. That's right. I've had 4 spikes of asparagus this year. I really need to do something with that patch because it's never produced the way it really should, but I think a lot of that is that the poor thing just gets really stressed. Next up, we have getting the gardens ready. This is where we share what we're doing to get our food growing operation up and running. And this week, I will be doing some more trays of starts. I never did start my kale. It's a little late to start kale, but I'm going to do a tray of kale anyway and find a shady spot for it and see what happens. I've also been working on some late bed preparation, and I've had the beds prepared and chipped in for the winter, so it's not like I'm starting from scratch, but what often happens to me in the spring is I plant stuff in those beds and then a bunch of weeds come up and I'm fighting that for a few weeks. And so I reached out to my friend Carly over at Purple Maze Farms and said, I want to try something different. What do you think I should do? Should I scrape back the wood chips and solarize the ground and just not plan to use that bed for a while until it's really been baked out? Or what, what do you suggest? And she said what she did this year, and it's been working pretty well, is she weeded it up. So you have wood chips on your rows, or I do, and there's dead nettle and chickweed coming up, which I've been eating. Well, I'm to the point now where I'm ready to transition into squash plants and other things on the rows. And so she suggested that I just pull that up by the root, which did lead to a really good bunch of greens for dinner last night. And then make sure it's all cleared out, put row cover over it. So this is the kind of row cover we're using here is more of a fabric-based one that's a little bit of shade plus keeping some of the warmth in at night. And I have hoops over the row that I did this on, so it's just row covered. And then she said, wait a week and you'll see a bunch of more weeds come up. Get rid of those and then plant. So we're going to give that a go on one of our beds and see if it does better than just what I've been doing, which is kind of pulling the stuff back that's growing, pulling the chips back and putting seeds directly in the ground without giving it that extra week to give us a first wave of weeds. And then like what happens to me right now is a bunch of weeds germinate after that, and I can't tell, is that a little radish coming up or is that a little something else, a little perilla. Perilla and radishes, by the way, look a lot like each other when they first come up out of the ground. So anyway, next up we have the Garden Economics Project, and I have nothing really to report here other than it's very hard at this time of year to walk into any garden center and not spend money. But I've been a good girl. I haven't spent anything more, and we're just focusing on getting production out of what we have. And now it's time to move on the main topic of the show. And this, as I said, it's an interview with Dori Mulder, who is a very motivated person. She's, I think, probably dreamed about, having more land and getting more from her land for a while. And she came across a fantastic opportunity to buy a piece of property. And, I guess probably without going too far into it, I'd just like to introduce Dori Mulder. And we will start with a very first question that you would ask anybody who got their first piece of land. How are you feeling about your land?
Oh my God, I'm so excited. It is just like the day we closed, I took 5 days of vacation and just spent 5 days straight out there.
Yeah.
And it is fantastic. Like there's so much work to do. And I think I spent the whole 5 days just picking up litter, but I didn't even care. Like it was so much fun just to be on my own land and just daydreaming.
Well, that sounds fun. Okay, so why don't you tell everyone a bit about yourself and why you decided to buy a country property, and like how long have you been planning this?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So my name is Dori and I am almost 40, and my husband and I have always daydreamed about having a retirement property on a river and have a cabin on a bluff. Just that's been our vision, because anytime we're canoeing and you always see that cabin on the bluff and the smoke coming out of the chimney, and we're like, that's what we want in retirement. And so obviously we're not anywhere close to retirement. But Chris was playing on the internet and just Googling riverfront properties and stumbled across this ad, and it sounded too good to be true. And so I'm like, well, we have to go look at it just so we can rule it out. So we're not always thinking, man, we should have went and looked at that and we passed up an opportunity. And so in an effort to rule it out, we went and looked at it, and it was just spectacular. And it had been on the market for a long time because they were marketing it for someone who would want to open a restaurant. And to give you some background, this piece of property, it's on the Gasconade River, and it used to be a restaurant inside of a cave. And it had went out of business about 3 years ago and was completely abandoned. And so they were trying to find a person who would want to buy this to open up the restaurant again. And so it came with, it's 40 acres. It has 9 cabins, and then it's got the cave that's overlooking the river. Mm-hmm. And it, the moment I stepped foot inside the cave, I was like, this could be an amazing house. I was not at all interested in running a restaurant, but Chris and I both agreed, like, this could be a dream house. And he is handy. He is amazing. He can do anything. And so I have no doubt that he'll be able to turn that cave into a house. And in the meantime, I am extremely excited about turning in at least a portion of that 40 acres into some homestead, just to be able to raise my own food and raise a few animals and live off the land. So it's like our little piece of heaven, and it'll take us a while to get it to how we want it, but we have the rest of our life to do it.
When we first talked, you said you were 10 years out from moving out to this property. Is that still the case after you spent 5 days there?
That is so funny that you should ask that. So I'm tied to St. Louis because of my job, and the piece of property is about 3 hours away. And I anticipated it would take at least the kids will graduate high school within the next 10 years, and then they will go off to college, and then we can move. And that was the plan. But after spending 5 days there, I want to figure out how to get out there sooner. And so I've started looking at other work possibilities that are much closer. And I don't know how long it'll take us, but I certainly hope that we're able to get out there sooner than 10 years from now.
Okay, so, and you've just spent 5 days on the property. You've only been back a little while. After spending 5 days on the property, like, what new things have you learned about it? What did you see while you were there? And has it changed at all? Because I know going in, you were already starting to make your plans. You had to wait 7,000 years to close on this, right?
Yes, we saw the property back in October, and we're just able to close on St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, and the reason I didn't want to schedule this interview sooner is you sent me a link to the property, and it was too cool for me to put it on the show before you closed. Yeah. So, I mean, like, now that you've had some time to spend time on it, what did you see there that you might not have been expecting?
Well, so the interesting piece is that since it is a very unique piece of property and it used to be open to the public, there are a lot of frequent visitors who are just curious. I mean, because whenever there's a little road that goes alongside the river, and when you look up, you can see the opening of the cave and all the work that's been done to make it enclosed for a restaurant. And then there's a whole bunch of cabins. And it would just, and I can understand, if I saw it, I would be genuinely curious and want to go explore. And so people come onto the property quite often. And that was one of the biggest realizations, is we have to emphasize to the public that this isn't public property any longer. It's
right.
Not going to be business, and establishing that it's our private property, and but also to not be too, I want to blend in with the community. I don't want to make any enemies whatsoever, but I just want to, emphasize that it's now private property and we're going to make it our home. And so there was a lot of, and that also led to the litter cleanup I had to do, because people would just party on the property, and they had I'm sure just bored teenagers have went through all the cabins and been very destructive. And so it's just a lot of cleanup, a lot of meeting all our new neighbors. And it's a very small town. So when I say neighbor, I don't even see any houses anywhere close. Right. But I do keep meeting people who are kind of driving up and are curious about who's bought this piece of property, because it has been vacant for so long.
Well, there's probably an undertone of, and what are they going to do with it, because it's turning into an eyesore.
Yes. And not only that, but it's like the riverfront is turned into kind of a party area where, teenagers would come at night and have big bonfires, and that's now our front yard. So trying to limit that and put up some gates and put up all the purple tape. But yeah, so that was one thing that's kind of surprising, which our solution to that, and it's such a win-win. Mm-hmm. My mom is the most unique woman. I just love her. And it's funny because the little brief parts I've heard that you've talked about your mom, they sound like they could be very similar. But my mom is just definitely the roughing it type. And the day we closed, she showed up with her camper. And so she's currently staying on the property and loving it. There's no electricity, no plumbing, there's nothing there, but she is in heaven. She's been planting flowers and just exploring and cleaning out all the old cabins and discovering what treasures lie in each of them, because these cabins were crammed full of just stuff, like so many dishes and Christmas decorations and just random stuff that whenever the place went out of business, like they left all their business records, just random things. So it's kind of like a little treasure hunt, seeing what all is still there. But so she is there with her shotgun, making sure the property is secure, and she is absolutely loving it out there. And I can admit I'm quite a bit jealous. I wish I was the one that was just out there roughing it full time.
Well, okay, so there's no power or plumbing. Was there at one time? Did it get disconnected?
Oh, yes. There was power and plumbing to everything. There's a well on the property that fed all the cabins and the house and the swimming pool and the cave and the restaurant. And so we haven't yet looked to see if the well still works, because we've got to get electricity hooked up first.
Right.
And we had an electrician come out and take a look. And they said it's no trouble to get electricity to the poles, but everything's been ripped out as far as getting it from the poles to the cabins or to the well or to the cave. So there'll be a lot of work there that has to be done, but they can't come in until we get the driveway repaired, because since it's right on the river, and whenever it floods, it washes out the culvert. And so it's so funny, and it's just part of the fun is discovering all the different steps, because we have no idea how, and this could be why it might take us 10 years, because every little step could increase the cost substantially, and we may need to work a while before we are able to repair things. So for instance, like the well, who knows how much that could end up costing, or the electricity, or the elevator. So there's an elevator.
Whoa.
Yes. The restaurant had an elevator to get from the base of the bluff up to the opening of the cave where the restaurant was.
Uh-huh.
And so I have no idea if it's functional or what it would take to repair it. So there's all these interesting hurdles that'll be fun to work out as we discover more and more about the property.
Okay, so let's put our pretend hats on for a minute. Let's say it's 15 years from now. You've been living there for 5 to 8 years, and your lifestyle's changed a whole bunch. What does that look like?
Oh, great question. So that would look like having coffee, sitting on a leather couch overlooking the Gasconade River, and spending time out on the land, tending to whatever I'm growing and eating whatever I grow. And we'd have chickens and possibly ducks. And I've got to still figure out if pigs help the land or hurt it. I don't know, but I think it would be really cool to have a pig or 2 or 3.
Depends on what you do with them.
And then we're surrounded by farmland where people raise cows, because I have come to the conclusion if I had my very own cow, I probably wouldn't have the heart to kill it and eat it. So, but I could try to make an arrangement with a neighbor where I could just pay to have my cow in with their herd so I wouldn't get attached to it. But it would be just enjoying the outside, digging in the dirt, figuring out how to live off what we grew and to minimize what we had to get from others. And then it would also possibly maybe one day turn into like a bed and breakfast with canoe rentals. Mm-hmm. Or if not that, then it would be nice for like all our extended family to have picked out a cabin that's kind of theirs, and that's where they kind of come to their retreat, to where it's like just a sanctuary of quiet, beautiful outdoors solitude.
Yeah, I mean, you could almost do that retreat thing and say 7 times a year we rent this out. Period.
Oh, wow.
And like, to groups, and then book them in advance, and that's it. And so that you don't have to have, I mean, if you're not wanting people there all the time, then that's how you do that.
That is a wonderful idea. And it's so perfect because it used to be a resort. Like this place was originally, it was in the 1920s when the original person who got this all together, he had a vision of creating a retreat for people from the city. And he's the one who built the cabins. And it's so cool to see all the foundation. They're so old. The foundation of the cabins are in the wood. It was all the way he milled the wood. Like you can still see all the lines in the wood.
Oh, cool.
And he had built a tennis court and a croquet court. And so there's still the frame of those courts that exist. And so my mom and I were daydreaming about making those like the garden and growing, vegetables inside these courts. And I had the dirt tested in different locations, and the tennis court has the best soil according to our extension office.
So what about tennis? Aren't you going to play tennis in it?
I cannot imagine playing tennis in that. I could just think there'd be so many more things to occupy my time with. And if I had extracurricular activities, I'd rather be in a kayak out on the Gasconade River.
Yeah, that sounds fun too. I love to kayak.
Which was one of the first things we did during our 5 days out there. Chris and I got in the kayaks just to see our property from the river perspective. And oh my goodness, I cannot wait for warm weather. Like it's going to be heaven, like absolute heaven. The river is beautiful and just so inviting. So that is definitely a highlight to this piece of property, is the location on the river.
I can only imagine. It sounds really beautiful. Okay, so you've mentioned pigs and ducks and chickens. Have you raised poultry or anything before?
Well, that's a great question. So whenever I was a kid, I grew up in Tennessee in a little tiny town called Etheridge, which is on the outskirts of Pulaski. And at that time, we did have chickens. We had chickens and rainbow trout. My dad had dug a bunch of ponds. And I was so little, like we ended up leaving there whenever I was 8. And my biggest memory of having all those chickens was that the dogs got in there and killed a bunch of them. And so aside from that, my only other real chicken experience is that I'm in the military, and I went to this school, and one of the instructors had like a little farm, and I was talking about how one of my lifelong bucket list goals was to like be able to kill a chicken and pluck it and be able to cook it and eat it. And he just thought that was the funniest thing. And he's like, well, come on over after class. And so I went there and met his family, and he had chickens, and he let me pick it out and went through the process and showed me how to kill it and pluck it and clean it. And he let me take it home, and then I cooked it. And the funny thing is now this property we just bought is 1 mile away from that same place where I killed that chicken.
No way.
It is amazing. And they are the nicest people. Like, I'm so excited to have them for neighbors. John came out to the property and was walking around, and he knows all the different trees and the different plants and was showing me all the stuff. And I mean, a wealth of knowledge. And he was born and raised there, and he ends up being 1 mile away from me.
That's perfect.
It really is.
That's probably your best resource right now.
Yes, I agree. And I had no idea. I did not know, because I've only interacted with him in the military setting and had no idea he knew all that about nature and Missouri right here where I'm now at. And so it's perfect.
Okay, so as you look at the work ahead of you, what are the things you're most scared of about digging into your new land?
I suppose I'm most scared of the hidden costs that we don't even know about yet. Mm-hmm. But even that, we've got all the time in the world. So if something is going to cost a lot, or, we can take our time or find, I guess here's another fear I have. I am very interested in figuring out alternative energy methods. Mm-hmm. But my husband is very much on, we just need to get the power on. He's not interested in figuring all this other stuff out. He's just like, let's get it on. Let's get lights out there. Then people will know it's occupied. And so it's kind of a balance between trying to find sustainable methods, but also being realistic about our timelines and what really needs to happen. Right. And I don't want to overcommit to one path to where it ends up being not cost worthy to go a different direction. And so I'm really strongly taking the advice you have said repeatedly about just taking your time and observing and just not jumping too far into too many different things. And so my goals for our first year, I mean, truly, my first goal is just to get everything cleaned out, like to get the cave cleaned out, because it's still filled with all the restaurant equipment and tables and booths and so much, which is so funny because pretty much anything worth anything was stolen, except all the restaurant kitchen equipment, because it's up in a cave and there's no easy way to get it out. And so I've looked it up, and that stuff does seem to have a pretty good resale value. So I just have to determine how on earth to get it out of the cave, and then how to get it to someone who really wants it. So that'll be a fun puzzle to figure out.
I do that the other way. If somebody really wants it, they can figure out how to get it out of the cave.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. But if you're looking at raising animals and possibly processing them, if there's commercial kitchen stuff in there, I'd take a good look at that, because like the sinks that they have and some of the countertops that are often in commercial kitchens are very helpful in processing.
You're absolutely right, because it's so funny, because had posted a bunch of pictures. We have a family Facebook group where I can share with the family what I'm up to. And my mom, when she saw that, she's like, don't get rid of that. She's like, we can turn one of the cabins into a canning station and use all of that for canning. She's like, so don't sell it all or don't scrap it. So yes, I'm sure there is stuff that can be used. And that's tricky too, is figuring out what things I should keep and what I should get rid of, because it still has all the big coolers and the refrigerators. just the big industrial style stuff that would run a full-size restaurant.
Yeah, it's hard to balance between I need to get rid of the stuff so I have room to do the things I need and knowing what to keep. I guess probably the best thing is not to kick yourself if you get rid of something you have to buy later, because that happens.
And I err on the side, I give away everything. Like, I am a non-clutter person, and I just give away to get rid of things. And so I do have to be cautious of trying to decide, okay, wait, can I really use this in the future? Or do I just need to get it out of the way so we can have space to figure out what we're going to do?
Oh, maybe your mom will be able to figure that out for you since she's out there all the time.
Well, we're like the yin and yang. My mom would never get rid of anything. So we do have to find a happy medium. She's like, oh, we should save all these dishes for whenever these are each, bed and breakfasts. And I'm like, no, we're going to get rid of them and buy new dishes when that time comes.
Well, it depends on how antique those dishes are, right?
Yeah, very true. Very, very true. But yeah, Chris has his eyes on the part of the cave that was where the restaurant cooking was done. He's decided that's going to now be his man cave, literally, since it isn't a cave. So we got to get all of that equipment out. He's got daydreams of putting a pool table and a big TV and all the other manly stuff in there.
It's the rare man cave that's actually in a cave, but I can see the allure of all of that.
Oh, yes. Yes. It's going to be an interesting adventure.
It sure sounds like it. Why in the world did they rip out all the infrastructure?
By infrastructure, what do you mean?
Like, it had wiring, it had plumbing, and now you have to redo it all?
Yes, I guess. I don't know if any of that was of value at all, or if it was just people that were bored and destructive. Because aside from that, like all the cabin windows and all the TVs, they've all been busted up. And so I don't know if it was, I have no idea if any of that cabling was valuable or if it was just boredom. But yeah, just destruction has definitely taken place over the 3 years of it being vacant.
So they've pulled the wiring out of the walls.
Yes.
That's worth money. That's why. It's copper in there. So those are your fun drug addicts who want to sell it for scrap.
Yes. And I do think there are several of those types in the area, unfortunately. So
yeah, that's everywhere you go pretty much at this point. Do you know if your infrastructure that's like, is it buried wiring or were they running overhead from, like the pole from the power company to the different buildings? It
was overhead.
Which I think on too?
Yeah. All the stuff's been pulled down. And I think Chris's plan is to do it underground this time.
Yeah. That's much nicer. It's more expensive, but it does look much nicer.
And our intent is to not run as much power as they had before. So they had like 5 different accounts powering different things. And the way the electric company has explained it is the way the accounts were set up, we have to stick with that same way. And so if we want it we are pretty much just going to simplify things and just get power to one pole and only power certain areas and leave some without power just because, we don't need as much power as there was there before since it's not going to be a business. And plus, sometimes it's kind of quaint having a cabin with no electricity to it.
Right. Well, plus you could go off, you can go solar off grid if you want to experiment with that. It's kind of nice to have the combination because you can fall back on, well, we do have power.
That is a great idea. And, I haven't even thought that far through it, but that is a perfect idea for how to tiptoe into learning about the different powering methods. So, yeah.
So the power company is going to make you set up 5 services again if you want to ever turn it back on?
If we want power to all the same places it was. So for sure we would have to have power. There's one box specifically for the cave portion. And then there's another box specific to the well and to the cabin that we're going to make for my mom to live in permanently.
Right.
And so we have to at least turn on 2 accounts.
That's so weird that they won't let you move a box, but I think they try to make their money back once they install one on a property.
Okay.
I don't know how it is. They're like, here, there's a minimum monthly electric fee, and for somehow that's supposed to offset the fact that they ran the drop. Even though you pay for it, you don't pay for all of the expense.
Right. And there is, like, once we turn it back on, there's a minimum monthly fee, whether we use it or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wherein if you never turn it on, then they're stuck.
Correct. Which I don't intend to turn a lot of these back on again, because they had, lights set up by the parking area for the restaurant, which we won't need to do that at all. And then so there's a lot of them that we won't even need to have power to anymore.
So have you been able to talk to the former property owners at all, or are they just out of the picture at this point?
Yes. So we have. They actually live in Louisiana now and are very eager to share information. And so since we've closed, I need to reach out to them again, because they're willing to share all the information as far as how because at this point, I don't even know where all the septic tanks are for each of these cabins. Like, I have no idea. So, and they were the original ones who had expanded the cave, because originally the cave opening wasn't near as large as it currently is. They went in and blew it up bigger to make the opening much larger to create the restaurant. And so, but they're in their 80s now and are very willing to share as much information as we want, which I'm eager to have that information. Though it has changed quite a bit since they've seen the property, because there was an intermediate buyer in between them owning it and us purchasing it. Mm-hmm. So I don't think they've actually been on the land for probably 15 or 20 years. So it is a bit different since they were there. But
so they kind of built it the way it is, and then somebody bought it, went out of business, and that's when all the problems started.
Yes. Yep. That is exactly correct.
Mm-hmm. So if you could only do one thing well with the property, what would it be?
Oh, gosh.
That's the hard question of the day.
That is a hard question.
Is it like have an awesome house?
Well, that is a great question, because it's so funny, because I've categorized in my mind that Chris is taking care of the cave. Like, my job is to just get it cleaned out and then let his creativity and handyman skills turn it into paradise. Mm-hmm. So I've almost kind of taken the cave off of my radar, because I don't know how to do all of those hands-on things to turn a cave into a home. Mm-hmm. So he got that under control.
I mean, that's not a skill most people have, specifically turning a cave into a home.
And I don't think he quite has it figured out yet, but I am fully, I just absolutely know that if anybody can make it happen, he can do it. Like, he'll find a way.
Yeah.
And so what I really want is to figure out what to do with the land piece of it, because most of it is all wooded and hills. There's only a small amount that's grassy. But I'm so interested to discover, like, what already grows there. Mm-hmm. Of that, what is edible? Because that's one of my favorite parts of your podcast, is when you talk about what edible things you found on your own land. And so I want to find what is edible that's already growing. What can we do with the land to make it produce more? And it's a discovery process, because the land already, somebody has went to so much trouble to plant beautiful things. There's daffodils all over, and there's irises coming up, and other flowers that I'm still learning what they all are. My mom knows them, and she's pointing them out to me. So I have so much to learn. But I'm interested in the land piece, and Chris is interested in the cave, and together it's going to end up coming together beautifully.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Although if you help him get the cave together, then you can make him help you get the land going.
That's true. That's true. And it's so funny, because we are such novices at this. Like, we don't have a tractor. We're just showing up with our work ethic and, like, just going to town, doing whatever needs to be done. And so, but we're both in agreement that we want this process to be fun. And if it begins to get overwhelming, that's going to take away the fun. And so we're trying to baby step into it and just enjoy the time while we're outside and while we're there, and document the process so that, when we feel like we're not able to get anything done, we can look back and, well, we've done this and this and this. And so we're just trying to enjoy the whole process and not solely focus on getting to the end objective.
Right. Well, and the biggest risk you have, from what I'm hearing, is that in order to get the power, you have to fix the driveway. In order to fix the driveway, you need to figure out water runoff. In order, like those things can cascade in a million ways. And so sometimes it's a good idea to sit back and say, what's the one thing? Is it power? Do we really just need to get power to the cave? Okay, we're going to do everything to do that so Chris can get started.
Yes.
And then once that's done, and like cleaning out, I applaud you for cleaning out first. I didn't do that. It was a huge mistake here. I'm still cleaning out from not cleaning out. I'll just put it that way.
Well, it's funny because the cleaning out part doesn't cost any money. So it's actually pretty easy. It's like, okay, we can save up for the next step. And in the meantime, clean out everything, because we truly were like, when we thought about what we want to get done. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm pretty sure this came from one of your podcasts when you were talking about just focusing on the basics, because I want to get everything cleaned out, get the electricity on, and to figure out if the well works. Yeah. And if by the end of the year we've gotten those 3 things done, I feel that that's a huge achievement.
But do you know if it's a well or a spring?
Well, it is a well, but there's also a spring that comes out of the bluff. So far, we've found 2 springs. So on the way up to the cave, there's some piping, and someone has like built a little box to where water is constantly coming out of the cave. Mm-hmm. And there's they call it a lake that's on the property. To me, it looks like a pond, but I Googled the difference, and apparently it's a lake if photosynthesis doesn't reach the bottom of it.
Okay. So it's deep.
It's deep, yes, but it's more the size of a pond. But whenever I follow the stream that's feeding that pond, I found another like really old, it's like it almost looks like a little fireplace built into the hillside. Yeah. And I didn't know what it was, but whenever John was there and showing me these trees, I was like, what is this? And he explained that it was a spring, and I just it's kind of gotten filled with sediment. And he's like, if you shovel all that out, it'll start flowing again. And so those are the 2 springs so far that we've discovered. And then the well, we know for sure the one well, but then when we had this, the appraisal done, mm-hmm. It had referenced that there are 2 wells on the property. So that's a question I need to find out, is where the other well would be. So I don't know.
That's a good question. You'll eventually find it.
Yes. And it's interesting too, because inside the cave, there are 2 little side exits in a way, like little mm-hmm. tunnels. And the neighbors all tell us that those eventually come out at the surface again. And we've explored them as far as we're daring. It gets after a while and we turn back. But eventually we'll crawl through until we can find where it comes out.
You could do cave tours. That'd be fun.
Yes, and my mom had told me the other day somebody had stopped at the property. It was 2 guys wanting to park their truck there, and they had kayaks, and they were part of a spelunking group, and they were going along the river to look for cave openings. So, yeah, there's a cave group close by, because there's tons of caves in the area. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, I wonder if you can age cheese in that cave.
Oh, my goodness. That sounds like an interesting thing to find out.
I mean, like, wouldn't that be fun? You can go out, through the man cave into the cave and get your cheese. I have to drive a mile to put my cheese in a cave. I'm jealous.
Well, yeah, we can just call it putting it in the back room. So, yeah, that is so funny. Yeah, there's so much to explore. And that's one of my favorite parts about this property, is it seems like we'll be exploring it for years and years and years to come. Like it's hard for me to imagine that anytime soon we'll know it through and through.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot going on. Well, 40 acres is a lot too. So there's a lot can change in that many acres.
Yes, very true.
Yeah. Well, thanks for giving me the interview. I thought it'd be fun to start with this one and then check in with you from time to time as things progress. Are you up for that?
Absolutely. That sounds great. As long as I don't bore you and your audience, I'd love to.
I don't think anybody with a property as cool as yours could bore us at all.
I hope our slow progress doesn't bore you, though, because I imagine it'll be a slow progress. But I'm sure the discoveries that'll come about will be interesting.
Is there internet capability out there? Do you know?
Barely. Like our cell phones, whenever we're out there, like if you stand in certain places, you'll start getting text messages again. So the service out there is, I don't know if we just need to switch providers, I'll have to check with the neighbors and figure out what to use.
Well, I know where we are, we have DSL through the
Okay.
company, and that's how we got internet here. Although we have the same thing, like cell phone works in certain places, and it's tempting to build a pagoda where it works because
Yes,
that's where you're going to go talk all the time. But yeah, we had DSL, and that helped us transition out to this property full time because we can work on the internet.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we're not far from bigger towns. Like, we're 1 mile, well, maybe 2 miles from the small town, but then we're only like 10 miles from a big town that has a Walmart. So there is civilization close by, and I'm sure everybody gets internet somehow. I just got to determine what the method is in that area.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a restaurant there was most certainly a landline, and not all landlines are capable of internet, but most of them are at this point.
Oh, yeah. And there were definitely landlines because we found a bunch of rotary phones all over the place.
I remember that.
Yes. My kids were so fascinated because they've never seen one. And we plugged it into the phone jack at home, and it still had a dial tone. And it was like they were practicing dialing the little circular thing. So that was fun.
That is fun. Okay, well, Dori, thanks so much for making time.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Okay, that was Dori Mulder with her update on the brand new property. She's just starting to get ready, and it'll be, I think, kind of fun to hear what she has to say as this whole project develops. In the show notes, I put a few pictures, one of the cave house and one of the river. And I think there's one of her other cabins there, but I thought some of you might be interested in seeing what that looks like, and she had shared some pictures with us. So if you're interested, check that out, and we'll hear back from Dori in a month or two when she's been out to the property a few more times. Next up, we have stories from the hauler, and we have had a big thing happen this week. The dying box elder tree that was right next to our guest cabin, like way too close to it, has finally been removed. The crews coming through here that have been leaving us loads and loads and loads of wood chips came on up, and we worked out a price for them to remove the tree without, well, cutting it down on top of my cabin, which has been a worry, or cutting it down on top of the power lines. They had this big giant arm thing that came in and was able to safely remove it. And what that means is I now get to look around for some sort of dwarf tree to go where that tree was. I'm not sure what I'm going to get. I thought about a persimmon, like a dwarf persimmon, and then I thought, well, that's just going to drop fruit all over people's car. We're looking at red buds. I don't know. It's something I usually like to put trees that give us food when I add a tree, but I think in this case we might go with something dogwoody or something of that nature, just because it is like right by where people park their cars, and people get salty when you put a tree up that puts things on the car. And the other story from the hauler goes back to our, stress on how important it is to have a strong community around you. As I said, I got the flu on Monday, and all I can say is thank goodness for friends. A couple friends came over and helped me by working on the house, cooked meals for people who were here this week because I was not moving very fast this week. So friends really did save the day for us this week, and we're really thankful for that. Anyway, with that, remember, if you like the show, you can support us while drinking a marvelous cup of micro roasted coffee. I didn't know it was called micro roasting until recently, but apparently what I do is micro roasting. Anyway, this custom coffee is the Hauler Roast, and if you're interested in checking it out, it's a dark roast. It's a very dark roast. And it is available at livingfreeintennessee.com. Some people have asked me who have gotten this coffee about, they put it in their coffee maker and it's not very strong. And so I did a little digging into that because I don't have that issue. And it turns out, because it's a whole bean coffee, if you don't grind it finely enough, it will not make as strong a pot of coffee. I actually talked to a few roasters this week to ask, is it something in the roast that I'm doing that makes it not as strong? And they said, no, it's all about the grind at that point. So if you're finding that your pot of coffee isn't quite strong enough, well, first of all, go buy a French press, man. That's the best way to get a strong cup of coffee. But, okay, so if you're using a drip maker, do just grind it up, and then I even tamp it down sometimes. You want to keep the water on the beans long enough to extract the coffee. Anyway, if you want to drop me a question, topic idea, or comment, you know what you can do, right? You can email me at nicolesauce@gmail.com. And, of course, we're still looking for a few more YouTube likes. So the link is in the show notes. Help me get enough people to get a vanity URL, and that will be really great for the show. This week had the weather turned, finally. So we've been up and down and up and down, and I guess over the weekend we had our last freeze, I hope. There's still a chance it could freeze one more time, but I think we had our last freeze. I had not put my tomatoes out yet, so that's good news because it's been tempting a few times. And we're up in the 70s, and the bees are swarming all over the state. So far, mine have not swarmed, but other people are reporting that their hives are moving around. So things are starting to heat up here. And that usually means we get pretty busy. It's funny. I've visited a few farmers on a weekly basis, and there's this week every spring, and it's probably coming in about 3 weeks, where we look at each other and we have like these deep bags under our eyes from constantly being outside trying to get the squash seeds in, trying to get the shrubs moved around, trying to get the fruit trees in, trying to make sure that the potatoes are doing well, getting the weeds, like all of these things start stacking up. And this is the time of year where you can either get overwhelmed or turn it into something fun. And this year I'm choosing to turn it into something fun. And part of the way I do that is by letting go a little bit. I know what we want to do. I know what our priority is. And I know that I could go out from dawn until dusk and work right now. And so instead of doing that, I'm going out and just doing a small thing at a time, taking a walk around the property, observing what's going on, and it's turning out to be a beautiful spring in Tennessee. So with that, friends, go out and make it a great week.